Forget the cartoons. Forget the storybooks. The hero you think you know is a lie. The real Hercules, the greatest hero of Greek mythology, began his legend covered in the blood of his wife and children, murdered by his own hands. This isn't a story about a hero choosing his destiny. This is the story of a man sentenced to a life of violence, haunted by a crime he was forced to commit, and sold to the world as a champion. This is the brutal, unfiltered truth about Hercules. How does a celebrated hero become a family killer? The answer isn't a tragic flaw or a moment of weakness. It's divine politics. Hercules was the illegitimate son of Zeus, king of the gods, born from an affair with a mortal woman. This made him the #1 target for Zeus's wife, Hera, a goddess whose power was matched only by her jealousy. From the moment he was born, she orchestrated his suffering, but Hercules was too strong to be killed by conventional means. So Hera devised a more insidious punishment. She didn't want to kill him. She wanted to break him. She waited until he had everything a man could want: a wife he loved, children he adored, a moment of peace in a life of conflict. Then, she reached into his mind and flipped a switch. A divine madness, a temporary insanity, erased the man and left only a mindless beast. When he woke up, his family was dead and his hands were red. The 12 labors weren't a quest for glory. They were a prison sentence, handed down by the oracle at Delphi. A decade of impossible tasks to atone for an impossible crime. The labors were not adventures. They were a grind, a brutal, repetitive cycle of violence and exhaustion. The first task set the tone. Kill the Nemean Lion, a monster whose hide was impervious to all weapons. Hercules didn't outsmart it. He didn't find a magical solution. He cornered it in a cave, blocked the exit, and engaged in a primal, bloody wrestling match in the dark. It was a contest of pure brute force. The lion's claws, which could shred armor, scraped uselessly against his divinely tough skin. He wrapped his arms around its neck and squeezed, not with heroic flair, but with the grim determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. The sound of its spine snapping was the first note in a long symphony of violence. He wore its skin not as a trophy, but as a uniform, the first of many bloodstains he would carry. Next, the Hydra. A 9-headed serpent in a swamp, a creature that embodied a twisted biological law. For every head cut off, 2 more would grow in its place. This wasn't a fight. It was a lesson in futility. Every swing of his sword made the problem worse. The monster was a living metaphor for his guilt. The more he fought it, the more it grew, hissing and snapping, a chaotic mass of heads. The solution was as brutal as the problem. With his nephew Iolaus, he developed a grim system. He would sever a head, and Iolaus would immediately cauterize the stump with a flaming torch. The air filled with the smell of burnt flesh and the hiss of boiling blood. It was a messy, ugly, desperate affair. He buried the final, immortal head under a rock, trapping a problem he couldn't truly kill, just like his memories. He then dipped his arrows in the Hydra's toxic blood, weaponizing his own trauma for the fights to come. This was the pattern. Hercules was not a detective or a diplomat. He was a blunt instrument. His solution to a problem was almost always overwhelming, destructive force. He didn't negotiate with the Erymanthian boar. He chased it through a snowstorm until it collapsed from exhaustion, and then carried the massive, struggling beast on his shoulders. He didn't reason with the Stymphalian birds, a plague of metallic monsters. He drove them into the sky with a terrifying noise, and then shot them down one by one, a grim rain of bronze and blood. Each labor was a new landscape of pain, a new monster to kill, a new layer of blood and grime on his soul. He wasn't getting stronger in spirit. He was getting harder, more calloused. The world saw a hero, a savior cleaning up the dark corners of the earth. But Hercules was just a man on a treadmill of violence. Each victory just another day he had to survive. The public image was a lie. While poets sang of his glorious deeds, the man himself was trapped in a prison of his own mind. He was the strongest man alive, capable of holding up the sky for the Titan Atlas, a feat of such impossible power that it defied comprehension. He felt the crushing weight of the cosmos on his shoulders, a physical burden that mirrored the psychological weight he carried every single day. But he could not save himself. He could not fight the memories that ambushed him in the quiet moments. The image of his wife's terrified eyes, the silence where his children's laughter used to be, these were the monsters he couldn't kill. The crowds cheered for the legend, the demigod who wrestled with death and won. But they kept their distance from the man. They saw the haunted look in his eyes, the permanent stain of blood under his fingernails. He was a walking, talking tragedy, a hero forged in a crucible of trauma. He was utterly, profoundly alone. His end was not glorious. It was not a final, heroic battle against a worthy foe. It was ugly, painful, and deeply ironic. He was killed by a shirt given to him by his second wife, Deianira, as a gift of love. But the shirt was poisoned. Deianira had been tricked by a dying centaur, Nessus, whom Hercules had killed with a poison arrow. The centaur told her his blood would be a powerful love charm. In reality, it was a slow-acting corrosive, mixed with the same Hydra venom that coated Hercules' arrows. When he put on the shirt, it was a death sentence. The poison activated with his body heat, fusing the fabric to his skin and burning him alive from the inside out. The strongest man in the world, who had survived gods and monsters, was brought down by a domestic dispute and a trick. He roared in agony, tearing at the shirt, but it only ripped away his own flesh. In his final moments, he built his own funeral pyre, a last act of control in a life that had been controlled by others. He chose to be consumed by fire rather than wither from poison. His death was not a victory. It was an escape. So what is the takeaway? What is the real story of Hercules? It's not a story about victory. It's not about being the strongest or the best. It's a story about endurance. It's about the raw, brutal, thankless task of carrying on when your world has been shattered. It's about waking up every morning with the weight of your own past on your shoulders and still finding a reason to stand up. Hercules' greatest feat was not killing the lion or the Hydra. His greatest feat was surviving himself. He teaches us that true strength isn't about how much you can lift. It's about how much you can carry. We do not choose our curses. We only choose how we carry them. This sanitized version of the hero, the smiling strong man of cartoons, is a modern invention. The ancient Greeks understood a darker truth, that heroes are not born, they are forged, and the forging process is violent and scarring. The original Hercules was a figure of immense pathos, a man whose divine gifts were inseparable from his divine curse. His story was a cautionary tale about the destructive nature of power, both mortal and divine. He was a hero not because he was perfect, but because he was profoundly broken, and yet he continued. He was a blunt instrument, yes, but he was aimed by a system of divine justice and mortal politics that was far more corrupt than any monster he faced. consider the labor of capturing the Cretan bull, the very same bull that sired the Minotaur. Hercules didn't just capture it, he wrestled it into submission and sailed with it back to the mainland. He was forced to confront the source of another hero's, or rather, another victim's, tragedy. He was cleaning up the messes of the gods and other kings, a divine janitor mopping up the filth of the cosmos, or the mares of Diomedes, flesh-eating horses trained by their master to feast on guests. He answered savagery with savagery. This was not the work of a noble knight. This was the work of a man who understood the grim logic of a violent world. His journey to the Underworld to capture Cerberus was the ultimate psychological test. He had to walk, living, into the land of the dead. He saw the shades of his fallen comrades and enemies. He was a creature of vibrant, violent life, in a kingdom of gray, silent memory. And somewhere in that silent crowd were the souls of his wife and children. He was in their world, but eternally separated from them. When he faced Cerberus, the three-headed hound of hell, he wasn't just fighting a monster. He was wrestling with the very concept of death, the barrier that kept him from his family. He won, dragging the beast into the sunlight, a feat that terrified his cowardly cousin Eurystheus. He had literally been to hell and back. But the trip didn't grant him peace. It only sharpened the pain of his loss. The man behind the legend was a storm of contradictions. He was a hero who committed unspeakable acts, a savior who couldn't save himself, a demigod who longed for the simple peace of a mortal life. The public saw the victories, the dead monsters, the saved cities. They didn't see the nights he spent staring into the fire, haunted by the faces of his children. They didn't see the exhaustion in his bones, a weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. They didn't see the loneliness of a man who was too strong to be understood, too dangerous to be loved without fear. His final moments on the funeral pyre were his only true act of self-determination. In a life dictated by Hera's hatred and Eurystheus's commands, his suicide was his own choice. The fire that consumed his mortal body was a final, agonizing purification. It burned away the pain, the guilt, the memories. It burned away the man. What was left was the legend, the immortal god who took his seat on Mount Olympus. But this apotheosis feels less like a reward and more like a final cosmic irony. After a lifetime of suffering as a man, he was forced into an eternity of being a god, forever separated from the mortal peace he may have craved. So, when you think of Hercules, don't think of a cartoon hero. Think of a man on a treadmill of violence. Think of the weight of the sky on his shoulders. Think of the blood on his hands that would never wash away. The story of Hercules is not a comforting myth. It is a brutal diagnosis of the human condition. It tells us that life is often a sentence, not a choice. It tells us that our greatest strengths can be our most profound weaknesses. And it tells us that heroism isn't about winning. It's about enduring. It's about carrying the impossible weight of your own life, long after you've wished for it to be over. That is the real strength. That is the real Hercules. Let's dig deeper into the psychology of the labors. They weren't just physical challenges. They were a meticulously crafted therapy of violence, designed by a system that had no other way to deal with a man like Hercules. Each task was a mirror, reflecting a different facet of his trauma and his nature. Cleaning the Augean stables in a single day was not just about filth, it was a task of humiliation. Augeas, the king, had let 30 years of dung accumulate from thousands of cattle. The task was meant to be degrading, to bring the mighty Hercules low, forcing him to wallow in literal filth. But Hercules, ever the problem solver of brute force, didn't shovel. He rerouted two entire rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, and washed the stables clean with a torrential flood. He answered a problem of filth with overwhelming power. He refused to be degraded. He would not scrub away his sins on his knees. He would blast them away with the force of nature itself. But at the end of the day, after the water receded, the ground was clean, but he wasn't. The internal filth remained. Capturing the Cretan bull was another layer of irony. This was the very bull that Poseidon had sent to his father, Minos, the one whose beauty had caused the king to sin, leading to the birth of the Minotaur. Hercules, the product of one divine affair, was now tasked with cleaning up the mess of another. He was the handyman of the gods' mistakes. He subdued the magnificent, rampaging beast and rode it across the sea. He was literally taming the sin of another king. A sin of pride and desire not unlike the one that led to his own birth. He was wrestling with his own origin story, a battle he could never truly win. What about the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons? This task started not with violence, but with diplomacy. Hippolyta, impressed by Hercules' reputation, simply agreed to give him her girdle, a symbol of her authority. For a moment, a resolution without bloodshed seemed possible. But Hera, ever the puppet master of his suffering, would not allow it. She disguised herself as an Amazon, spread a rumor that Hercules was there to abduct the queen, and incited the warrior women to attack. The result was a bloodbath. Hercules, believing he had been betrayed, killed Hippolyta and took the girdle by force. This labor is perhaps the most tragic. It shows that even when Hercules tried to be more than a blunt instrument, his curse and Hera's hatred would inevitably twist the situation back to violence. He was damned if he fought, and damned if he didn't. Peace was never an option for him. This pattern of inescapable violence defined his existence. He was a hero because he was a killer. The world needed monsters slain, and he was the most effective monster slayer in history. But the very quality that made him a hero also made him a pariah. He was too good at his job. He was a weapon that was always loaded. People celebrated his results but feared his methods. They wanted the safety he provided, but they didn't want him living next door. This is the hero's paradox. To be effective, you must embrace a part of yourself that society fears. Hercules embraced it fully, and it cost him everything. His internal life must have been a silent hell. Imagine the PTSD, the flashbacks to that night in his home, the faces of the monsters he'd killed, blurring with the faces of his own children, the constant, grinding exhaustion, not just of the body, but of the soul, the knowledge that your own strength is a ticking time bomb, that at any moment, a goddess could flip a switch in your head and you could become a monster again. He lived in constant fear of himself. The lion skin on his back was not just armor, it was a warning, a sign to others and to himself of the beast that lived within. His death, then, was the final, logical conclusion to a life of pain. The poison of the Hydra, a tool he had used to bring death to so many others, was turned back on him. It was a karmic circle closing. The love of his wife, the one thing that might have offered him some solace, became the delivery mechanism for his own destruction. It's a story that is almost Shakespearean in its tragic architecture. He could not be killed by an external enemy. His downfall had to come from within, from the very things he fought to protect: love and family. The fire of the Pyre was not just an end. It was the only possible purification for a man so thoroughly stained by life. It was the only way to separate the man from the curse, the mortal from the immortal. the pain from the legend. Therefore, the legacy of Hercules is not a simple one. It is a dark and complex tapestry woven with threads of glory, guilt, violence, and profound suffering. He is a symbol of humanity's eternal struggle against forces beyond our control, both external and internal. He represents the terrible price of greatness and the unbearable burden of a traumatic past. He is a hero not because he was good, but because he was strong enough to keep going when he had every reason to give up. He is the patron saint of survivors. The story of Hercules is not about how to win. It's about how to lose and lose and lose again and still have the strength to get up and face the next day. It's about finding a sliver of purpose in an ocean of pain. It's about carrying the weight of the world, not because you want to, but because you must. And that is a far more relevant and far more powerful lesson than any cartoon could ever teach. Closing thought. We do not choose our curses. We only choose how we carry them. Let's put Hercules in context with the other great heroes of his era. Achilles fought and died for immortal glory, Kleos. His choices, though tragic, were his own. He chose a short, glorious life over a long, forgotten one. Odysseus fought for 10 years to get back to his home, his Nostos. His struggle was one of intelligence and cunning against the whims of the gods, but his goal was clear: family, kingdom, peace. These heroes had a purpose they chose, or at least understood. Hercules had neither. His labors were not for glory. The world already knew his name. His fame was a source of fear, not admiration. He wasn't fighting to get home. His home was a crime scene he could never unsee. He was fighting simply to atone for a crime he didn't consciously commit. He was a man serving a life sentence for a murder his body committed while his mind was hijacked. His struggle was not for a grand purpose, but simply to endure the day. While other heroes had a destination, Hercules only had a path, and that path was paved with violence and pain. This makes him a uniquely modern figure, a hero defined not by his goals, but by his trauma. He is the archetype of the veteran returning from a war he didn't start, decorated with medals but haunted by his actions. He is the symbol of anyone who has survived a profound trauma and must now navigate a world that seems trivial in comparison. The world wanted a hero, a smiling demigod to save them from monsters. What they got was a broken man who was just trying to survive the monster inside himself. And that is a story far more brutal and far more relevant than any cartoon could ever capture.